So Scott, thank you for coming today and joining our little program here. And the reason why I invited you onto our show is that you have an extraordinary amount of expertise and resources that you've been doing with construction for almost 30 years of your life. And I want to give people kind of a background of who you are and what you do. But I've known you for I want to say close to 8 years now, is I think the first time I met you. And I've been to a number of your conferences and classes, and I've just learned a tremendous amount of stuff from some of the programs you've put together. So I've got a lot of respect for who you are and the knowledge that you have in the construction industry. So I want to introduce you by, you got two levels of expertise in construction. One is that you've owned a pretty sizable roofing contracting company in the Washington, D.C. metro area for almost, 30 years now? When did you start Maggio Roofing?
Yeah, 1989. So we're getting close to 30.
Wow, that's quite a few years. So you've been able to grow that business over the years. But what's more impressive is the second company that you're part of, and you're currently the president of Certified Contractor Network, which is, I guess, my definition. I'll let you kind of describe what it is, but it's really a trade organization for construction contractors on how to make them a lot more profitable and efficient. Is that kind of a general way of describing what CCN is?
Yeah, CCN is an organization that was created by successful contractors to share best practices, and then that kind of morphed into actually training those best practices to other contractors to get them to understand not necessarily the technical aspects of installing their products or performing their services, but more from a business standpoint, from the planning aspect of the business all the way through sales, production, and admin processes. Sort of try and make the company not a franchise model, but to the point where you've got systems and processes running your business, so that as an owner, you're not kind of handcuffed to your business and handcuffed to a job, and you're building more of an asset.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've been running CCN for what, 10 years, somewhere in that range?
Yeah, I purchased CCN in 2009. I was a member. I first joined with my roofing company in 1997.
And some of the neat things about CCN is that I've been to I believe 3 different of your conferences that you guys have, and then one of your mastermind classes on marketing, which was just wonderful. But to meet the other contractors there, and a lot of them will come up, and I know you have different points where some of them become presenters at some things, and others just kind of share their stories about their before and after CCN process. And I've seen people sit there and cry because the transformation that's taken place in their company over the years of having you help them with, you and CCN help them with, kind of make them more efficient and profitable, and guys that were just about ready to go out of business, and then all of a sudden they start putting some of these processes in place and they fix a few things, and then all of a sudden now they're making a lot of money. And so it's really neat to see that, because that's where there's not a lot of organizations, especially trade organizations, that I think have that much impact. Because I think most trade organizations out there are just, well, here's some best practices and hope you kind of go with them. But you guys kind of take it to the next level. You want to maybe describe some of the things that, what makes CCN a little bit different than some of the other trade organizations out there?
Yeah, the interesting thing is, most of the trade organizations, if you've ever been involved or you go to the local, like on a local level, you go to those meetings, everybody goes there and no one has a problem. You're amongst all your competitors, and everybody's asking, how you doing? Oh, I'm doing great. How's business? Everything's great. And no one ever has an issue. No one ever has, no one wants to share their problems, because they don't, whether they don't want to appear weak or they don't want to, let someone know that they're having a problem. And most people aren't willing to share the solutions. With CCN, it's a different group of people. I mean, these are typically the best of the best contractors around, but they're still human beings, and we all have issues and we all have problems in our businesses. And it's just nice to get amongst a group of individuals that are willing to share the solutions and share what works and what doesn't work, and it helps you. You end up realizing that everybody's got problems. Everybody has pretty much the same problems. It's just a matter of how do you solve those problems, and how do you get your business to the point where you're not worried about finding that next solution, or trying that next what I guess I'm trying to find the right words, but that trial and error. You can avoid all of the trial and error by talking to people who've already been through some of these problems, and have tried different solutions, and all of a sudden you just leapfrog way ahead with your business, and you avoid all of those issues and problems that people tend to have over and over and over again. And one of the problems that I found, and as a contractor when I first started, my problem was I couldn't talk to anybody. I didn't have anybody to talk to. My wife didn't understand it. My friends certainly didn't understand that. They weren't business owners. They worked for, whether they were accountants or lawyers or what have you, salespeople at different companies, large corporations. They didn't understand what it was like to have a crew of 20 roofers working for you and the problems that you have. They couldn't understand that, I pay people on Friday and Monday they were looking for a loan, or people didn't show up one day, or they showed up drunk, or the child support orders came in, or the wage garnishments came in. They couldn't understand what world I was living in, and worrying about people following OSHA practices or accidents on jobs. As a business owner, especially a contractor owner, it's hard to find a group of people that understand what you're going through. And CCN, if nothing else, provides that outlet for a lot of people. And these become really good friends. I know over the course of the last 21 years that I've been part of the organization, it's just been a real good, I don't want to say crutch for me, but it was a place to go where people understood what I was going through. And that alone made my life a whole lot easier. And then allowed me to fix the problems in my business so that I didn't have to actually work in the business every day. Now, it didn't happen overnight. Nothing does happen overnight. There's no magic bullet. And I know everybody who's probably listening to this is thinking, well, where's the magic bullet? What's the secret sauce to get my business to that next level? It's a function of doing everything right, is really what it comes down to. And you have to implement all of these systems and processes in your company so that your people can do the job. And without them, you end up being a one-man band, and that's no fun, because then you've got a job and you go on vacation, everything stops. In my company, in my roofing company, right now I'm talking to you, I'm at the beach. I live at the beach at this point. I moved away from Washington, D.C. about a year ago, and my roofing company runs out of D.C. without me there. I show up 1 or 2 days a week in the office, and everything runs smoothly, and we're actually growing at this point. So it's just a matter of having the right people in place, having the right processes so that you can plug people into those processes. And you can have, the business can give you a really nice life if you let it. But you have to be able to, you have to want to do the work, and you have to associate with the right people.
Yeah, and I think I think what you just described, living on a beach and having to work a couple days a week, is probably the dream of most contractors out there. It's like, how do I get that? That's what I want, Scott. And so, but I think you did hit the nail on the head with what is different about CCN, and it is kind of that closeness and openness. Because one of my favorite things about your conferences that you have is you always have a part of that conference of where you'll bring in 20 contractors in the room, and this breakout session is about you guys. What's your biggest problems you're having right now? What do you want to talk about? And then you got your little whiteboard, and you're writing down whatever, go around the room. Okay, what's your biggest concern? And let's get it out in the open, where you got 20 other really successful contractors right now in the same room that can share what's working for them or what challenges they're having. And then you feel like you can really open up. And that is a little bit different. It's that sense of openness that you guys provide with a lot of things you do, I think does make a big difference.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I know in my first meeting that I went to back in 1997, there was I didn't, to be honest with you, I didn't look at him as a competitor because he was in the Baltimore area, but it was a company that I knew of. They were an 80-year-old company. Now they're pushing over 100 years. And they were, from what I knew, very high priced in the market. And I was kind of your worst nightmare as a contractor. I mean, I was the high volume, low price guy, and just low ball contractor. And I remember looking, at their business and saying, geez, how do I get there? Like, how do I get to the point where I'm charging, those high prices and still getting the work? And they were talking about, in one session of a conference, just the different forms and the different things that they use to communicate with their customer. And they were things that I needed that I didn't have. And I remember walking up to the owner of the company saying, hey, would you mind sharing one of those, those forms that you talked about developing? And he was just like, yeah, sure, no problem. And when I got home, now you gotta remember it's 1997, so there was no internet, the email, there wasn't really email, so you couldn't email it to you. But I got a packet in the mail 3 days later with every form and every document that they've ever made at that point. And it was a pretty thick envelope with a note saying, feel free to plagiarize and take what you want out of this and use it for your business. And it was just an amazing thing. And that's the kind of people that are in the organization. So it becomes, you start to realize that it doesn't really matter if somebody's a competitor or not. We kind of operate off the theory that a rising tide raises all ships. So just because someone's your competitor, the best thing you could do is teach them how to do things right so that they're charging the right price and they're not being that lowball contractor that's going to go out of business. Because the reality is most contractors go out of business within 3 to 5 years. And if you're trying to compete on price, I mean, think about that. You're trying to compete with contractors that are putting themselves out of business in 3 to 5 years. You just can't do it. And, so that's one of the biggest issues facing contractors is understanding how to overcome that. Most people start thinking, and it really doesn't matter whether you're doing new construction or rehab work, retail work, it's the same issue. Everybody's fighting the same problem. You're dealing with a contractor who's, a general contractor. The general contractor wants the lowest price. At least that's what he's going to say to you. He wants the lowest price. But the reality is that general contractor wants the best job. He doesn't want a headache on his job. He wants a smooth project. He wants a sub or, a company who's doing part of the project, whether it's the roof or windows or siding or whatever it is that you're doing. He wants a contractor that's going to get in, get it done efficiently, and not cause him any grief. That's not necessarily the lowest price contractor, right? That you might charge a little bit more to give him that value. And that doesn't mean you're going to be the highest price contractor because, sometimes you do have to work in some constraints. But if you put your company together correctly and you have the right systems and processes, you can become more efficient, still offer, high value at a reasonable price where you can make a profit and not be that low ball contractor. But you've got to have everybody dialed in, from your project manager to your number 2 guys in the field to your dispatch people to the whole company. Everybody's got to be rowing in the same direction.
Yeah. Now, one last question about CCN. It's not specialized for any one contractor out there. And I know that, but I know some of the listeners here who are insulation contractors. Well, I'm not a roofer, or I don't do siding or windows. Would they still find value in what you do as an organization?
Yeah, the funny thing is, when I first joined, the founder of the organization was a roofing contractor. So most of the people that joined were roofers. And as the years went on, I developed some relationships with different manufacturers. One was James Hardie, where we do a lot of work, a lot of training for James Hardie. All of a sudden, we got a lot of siding contractors that came into CCN, and James Hardie's largest contractors are CCN members because they learned how to do the business correctly. And every contractor has the same problem. I don't care if you're installing insulation, landscaping, windows. You just take out window and put landscaping. You take out roof and put insulation. It's the same problems. We're all dealing with the same issues over and over and over again. And it's, one of the big issues that I know that we start out with when I first meet a contractor is making sure they understand their numbers from a business standpoint. And that doesn't matter what kind of contractor you are. You can be anything. In fact, it's just about every business owner. doesn't really understand their numbers. And if they did, then they could sort of understand what they need to charge. And then once you know how much you need to charge, then you got to figure out, well, how do you charge that? How do you get that price? But it all starts with the basic understanding of, what are your numbers? What are your metrics for your business?
Yeah, this might be a good transition and segue then into, I think the topic that I want to talk about today is business operations, because I think that is one of the topics that a lot of contractors really struggle with. And so, and I know you guys have like a 3.5 or 4 day class on just teaching contractors how to do business operations. So is there 1, 2, 3 buckets that you can kind of break up into what do you teach at those classes, and what are some of the most important things that contractors need to know about their business operations?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, I mean, I was just reading this on I'm online on different social media sites, and there's this one site that it's a Facebook group that's devoted to storm restoration contractors. So it's all storm guys, which is typically not the contractors that I meet in CCN. But I'm listening to this one thread, and it's a guy asking, the question was, what do roofers in Ohio charge for re-roofing? What's the average price for whatever he was asking? And I thought to myself, this is somebody that just doesn't understand the basics of business, because you can't go by what the average contractor charges, because every contractor's got a different set of overhead and a different set of costs, and you've got to operate by your costs. So the first thing that we kind of talk to contractors about is understanding your numbers, understanding what are your fixed costs and what are your variable costs. And I know it just sounds so basic, and it's unfortunate, and it's common sense, but unfortunately, common sense isn't so common anymore. And there's a lot of contractors that have gotten into, whether it's roofing, insulation, siding, I don't care what business is, they didn't grow up saying, geez, I want to be an insulation contractor. I want to get up on a roof and spray foam on a roof. There's not many of us did that. We sort of fell into it, right? I mean, we were working there maybe in a summertime job, going through school, and we found out all of a sudden we were making a good living. So that's what we started doing. And we were working for someone else. And unfortunately, we got angry. Maybe we got pissed off at our boss for some reason, and we quit. And we said, I can do this on my own. And all of this, next thing you know, you own your own business, and you don't know what to charge. So you kind of say, well, my old boss charged this much money, so I'll charge this much. I'll charge a little bit less because I don't have all the trucks, and I don't have all the building, and I don't have all that other stuff, or that good stuff like insurance and workman's comp and things like that. I don't have any of that, so I don't need to charge that much. And then they're good craftsmen, so they do a good job, but then they get too much work, and all of a sudden they have to hire people. And next thing you know, you got a few more trucks, you got some equipment, and now you've got overhead, but you haven't counted that into your pricing. And then you start taking on jobs that are maybe a little bit more complicated than just a straight insulate an attic job, or spray foam, a small little roof. Now all of a sudden you got into a commercial job where it's a little bit bigger, a little bit more complicated, and you didn't quite understand the nuances of the job, like the fact that the general contractor said, hey, we're ready for you, and then you show up and they're not ready, right? There's 15 trades running around, and you're supposed to do your work around those people, and you don't really understand all of those things until you get into it. Well, that's going to raise your costs. So you've got to start figuring out what those costs are, so that you know how to set up a job, and that you know how to really price out the job correctly. And again, understanding what's fixed, what's variable, what your overhead is, so that you can come up with, and then have a system for job costing, tracking your costs for every job, so you can figure out, are there certain jobs you're doing that you're making money, and certain jobs you're doing that you're not making money? And maybe there's, you're a roofing and siding guy, and, or maybe you're just a roofing guy and you want to get into insulation. So you start doing insulation because it's a natural fit with the roof. Then you find out, if you don't track your costs, you may not realize you're losing money on every insulation job you do. And you might have been better off not even doing those jobs. So you've got to have a system for tracking those costs and things like that. So we kind of, the first thing that I do is sit down with a contractor and really get them to understand their numbers. And And we do that by putting it into a revenue pro forma, separating out their different segments of their business, where they make their money, which I would call a profit center. Maybe it's roofing, maybe it's siding, maybe it's windows, or if you only do roofing, maybe it's commercial roofing and residential roofing, or maybe it's new roofs and repairs. So you've got to kind of break it out and figure out where the money's coming from, and then what are the costs associated with those projects, and then what are your fixed costs, your rent, your utilities, your salaries, your insurance. All of those things are fixed costs that you've got to account for and figure out how much needs to be assigned to every job so that you can cover your costs and you can actually make a profit. And that's usually an eye opener for most contractors, because they weren't really strong in the financial component.
Yeah, they never went to school and got an MBA or an accounting degree or something to kind of teach them all that stuff, and covering that in a short little class where you guys break it down and make it simple for your standard typical contractor to understand, I think is extremely valuable.
Yeah, I mean, most people rely on their accountants to do it. And the problem with relying on your accountant is you're looking at it after the year is done. So you've already lost the money, right? The money's already been spent, the money's already lost. So it doesn't really help you. You've got to be proactive with this. And frankly, most accountants don't understand the contracting world. They just don't understand it. They look at total material. Like, for instance, I mean, I have one accountant that's worked for me for years, and he looks at total materials in to total revenue. Well, the problem with that is I do a lot of different types of jobs. So just to say that we spend 25% of our volume on materials isn't good enough for me. I need to know how much money do we spend on materials on flat roofing, and how much do we spend on steep roofing, and how much do we spend on repairs, and how much money on materials do we spend on maybe a metal roof or slate roofing, things like that. I have to break it out so that I can tell, well, am I making money selling those types of roofs? Because maybe I don't want to sell those types of roofs. Maybe I'm better off just focusing on the flat roof, and that's it, because that's what we do best. And all these others, either we need to raise our price or we need to get out of it. So you have to really be able to get down to the granular level, and that actually takes a lot of discipline, and it takes some systems and processes to be put in place in your company so that you can do that. And it's not difficult. It's just one more thing to learn, but it's an easy system process to teach somebody.
So when we're talking business operations, you always start with accounting, and then after accounting, do you move on then to creating some of these work processes, or what does that really mean to a contractor? Or is that really the next step? Of maybe you can kind of walk us through that.
Yeah, I mean, what happens is once you've gone through the financial aspects of it, then you start figuring out, okay, well, I need to do a certain volume of business. Right? I've got to project out a certain volume needs to come in the door so that I can turn a profit and pay myself, some money. So at that point, you start to figure out, well, these are the types of jobs that I do, and this is the price point that I need to sell at. Well, then how do I sell that? So that leads into the sales component of the business. So you've got to teach your salespeople how to sell at that level, whatever level that is, whether you're selling at a 40% gross profit or a 30% gross profit or 50% gross profit. It depends on, every business is a little different, and depending on the market you're in and the clientele you're serving, you have to figure out what works for you and your cost structure. But then you have to teach those salespeople how to sell. So there has to be a process. There has to be a sales process to teach them, because honestly, most salespeople have no idea how to sell. They just go in and they bid a job. Now, if you're just out there bidding jobs, you've got to be the low price to get the job. And if you're the low price, we know what happens to the low price contractor. So they make no money, or they go out of business. So you've got to teach them a process so that everybody's following the same process. And that way you can hire new people and plug them in and teach your process. You have to teach that, make that sales process replicatable. And that's one of the things that we do in CCN, is we teach them a process. From there, That usually, and the process works very well, I have to say. I mean, it works extremely well, and people close a lot of jobs. The problem is that that leads to problems in your production department, right? Because now you've got all this work, and you've got salespeople that are promising the world. They're promising this dream, whatever it is that they're promising that you're going to do as a company, and now the production department has to live up to it, and that leads to some issues. So you have to teach a process for how the production staff schedules the job and actually installs the job. Again, we don't teach the mechanics of how to put a roof on, or how to insulate an attic, or how to insulate a wall, or whatever it is, or install a window. We teach the soft skills. How do you deal with the crew? How does the foreman or the project manager deal with his crew? How does he deal with a problem when it comes up on a job? How does he deal with a dispute with the owner of the building, or the owner of the contracting firm that he's working for, or the homeowner directly? How does he, and there's step-by-step processes on how to deal with that are very effective. But most contractors I know, especially in the production end of things, they give a lot of work away for free. And for example, we have a contractor in the Carolinas that's primarily a new construction contractor. I mean, they have a small, I think a $10 or $15 million repair and replacement division, but their new construction division is, I think they're doing about 40 million a year in their new construction. And they weren't sure that we could help them in that, because they were dealing with big builders, the Pulte's and the D.R. Hortons and companies like that. And if you think general contractors are inexpensive, try home builders. They're looking to shave every dime off of it.
Absolutely.
But the reality is they want the right job, and they want it done without any problems. But a lot of those big home builders, they don't have their systems and processes down. So they call up the siding guys or the roofing guys and say, hey, we're ready. Contractor goes out and they're not ready. So usually what happens is the contractor shows up, the roofer shows up, the siding guy shows up and sees that, Christ, this job's not even ready. I mean, we can't install. The materials, they've got things in the way. They've got people working on there. They got HVAC guys inside. They got plumbers that haven't popped through, pipes through the roof, or a whole bunch of other things that could possibly be wrong and stop them from doing their job. And they realize that they need to manage that on the front end. And they've developed, with our help, they developed systems and processes to deal with the builder to manage that part of it, where they're not sending a whole crew out there. And even if you subcontract the work, I mean, you think about it, if you have subcontractors and you send them out to a building, how happy are your subs going to be if they have to go back 3 times? Yeah. Even if you're paying them by the piece, maybe your costs don't go up, but your subs costs go up, and then they don't want to do work for you anymore because they're running back and forth, or the material's not in the right place, or it just costs them too much and they'd rather work for somebody else. So they've developed, systems and processes on how to streamline that. And then they found that they do a lot of siding, and they would put the siding up, and then the concrete guys would come in at the end, and the concrete guys would have overspray on the siding,
and mess up their work.
The builder would call the siding guy up and say, hey, you got a mess here. You need to clean it up. And most of those guys would just go out there and clean it up and not charge for it. And they started to learn that wasn't their problem. All of a sudden now they found a whole new profit center for going back and cleaning up, and they charged the builders for it. And sure enough, after the builder got charged for it a few times, the builder's like, why are we paying for that? That's the concrete guy's responsibility, not the siding guy's responsibility. So they, sometimes you can develop systems and processes on a job that fix your costs by shifting the burden to the right people. And it's talking to them, they've increased their profit margin by about 10%. So what ended up happening was, where they were doing new construction, they used to net out 3 or 4 points on the bottom line. They're up to a 10% net profit on new construction.
That's huge. Yeah, that's absolutely huge. That's a really neat story, because most of our contractors on the installation side are, I think, primarily in new residential construction. So that's kind of neat to hear how you've helped contractors in that kind of arena, because you're right, the home builders are really, the cheapest of the cheap guys out there. They always give me the lowest bid and that's all I care about. But what you're saying is that it's a little bit more than that, and if you do it right.
Yeah, and it becomes selling them the value. And if you know how to sell them on the value, all of a sudden, some of those home builders that thought that they wanted the cheapest price find out that the cheapest price isn't necessarily the best deal for them, because maybe the job doesn't get done in a timely manner, and they don't get to bill the bank to get their draws quicker. And sometimes if you can organize a job correctly and help them organize their job correctly and provide that value for them, makes your job easier, makes them more money, and it allows you to charge more money. And that's what we found, that's worked over and over and over again, because most contractors that deal with those builders don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to manage a job. They just know how to go out and put a roof on, or go out and throw insulation in, or go out and put up gutters. But they don't know how to help the builder make more money. And you can help a builder make more money and still charge more and make more money for yourself. It becomes a win-win situation. So, and then they like you more because the jobs that they have you on work so smoothly versus the jobs that you're not on. And all of a sudden they're willing to pay a little bit more to have you at their projects. And we've seen that happen a number of times for the contractors that are doing it right.
That sounds like it's one of the key success points then when dealing or trying to sell to these home builders, is that you, like you said earlier, you can't just go in there with a bid. You have to be able to show that home builder of how you coming in with and being able to apply your materials with your labor can actually make that builder more profitable. Is that really kind of, and how do you set that up? And that's what they need to.
Yeah, it comes down to what's in it for me. And the builder's looking at that. They want to know what's in it for them. And they always think that it's, well, the cheapest price is what's in it for me. And that's not necessarily the case. The cheapest price isn't necessarily what's in it for them. So you have to figure out what their pain points are and solve their pain points. And if you can help them, you're going to get the job and you're going to make more money.
And you, CCN teaches a lot of that. What, you guys have like a 5-day sales boot camp, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we start, like I said, we start with the business planning, which is 4 days, and that usually leads to sales training, which is a 5-day training program for salespeople. And then that leads to usually production training, which is a 3-day training. And then we have what we call our business operations or admin training for the office, the back office staff, which is another 3-day program. Then we have different offshoot programs, hiring. We just launched a hiring service where we help contractors how to go out and hire and interview and do all that, all that good stuff, because that's a big problem right now, finding people. So how do you go about finding the right people and interviewing them and getting them on board?
Yeah, and that's got to be a real pain point for a lot of contractors out there right now, because of the labor pool is a little bit shallow right now because everybody has a job.
Everybody's in the same boat. Doesn't matter what part of the country you're in, everybody's in the same boat. Where do I find good salespeople? Where do I find good installers? Everybody's there.
What's the one big takeaway that you want to maybe give the people out there listening to you right now? Like, the contractor owners out there right now that are saying, I'm struggling with a few areas, or where do you kind of see that they might be struggling the most based on your experience dealing with contractors, hundreds of contractors in all different segments of, what's the number one thing? If they just did that one thing, it would probably maybe transform, maybe not transform, but at least make a pretty decent difference in what they're doing on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think it starts with the financial understanding. That's number one. But the reality of that is that you can have all the best plans in the world. If you don't have money, you can't solve any problems. And I was taught a long time ago, money solves a lot of problems. So I would say if they could fix their sales process, if they can get a sales process, fix their sales training, and figure out how to get more money for their projects. And that's what we teach. And they start getting more money. When you've got more money, you can fix things with the money, especially if you're struggling. And that's, most contractors are struggling. And I would say for people listening to this, you're not alone. Right? You may think it's just you. You may think you're the only one that's having this certain problem. I guarantee you there are 25 contractors listening to this that have the same problem that you have right now. and there are solutions to those problems. You just have to find the people who can give you those solutions. I know when I first found CCN, I heard all of this, what I'm talking about, and I thought it sounds too good to be true. These are all the answers. I mean, they were all the problems, but it's too hard over a webinar to give you every specific answer. So, and I remember thinking the same thing. Well, how do I get these answers? And that's what led to when I called up the founder. He had said, well, we have these conferences. Back then it was 4 times a year. We don't do it 4 times a year now. We only do it 3 times a year. And he invited me to a conference. And he said, hey, listen, why don't you just come to a conference? Our next one this was February of '97. And they were having one in Fort Lauderdale in March. And it was a month away. And I said, well, hell, it's cold. I mean, I'm in DC, and it was cold in February. So going to Florida in March sounded like a good deal. So he invited me to come see this conference, and I went down. And the network was relatively new. When I showed up, there were 40 people in the room. Now there's a couple hundred, but there were 40 people from all over the country in this room. And I remember thinking, after listening for a day, either they're all full of crap, and this guy had me fly down to Florida to try and, I don't know, con me out of a couple $1,000, or something real was going on here. And I'm glad I had an open mind, because I realized that everybody has the same issues. It's just a matter of, can you get dialed in and find the answers to those issues? And there's plenty of people out there that have the solution. It's just a matter of whether you're open and willing to listen to it and then implement. So, I mean, there's plenty of organizations out there that can help you. CCN is one. We have these conferences. So if somebody's listening to this and they're, well, what do I do? How do I find out how to do that business planning? Or how do I find out how to do that sales training? I would say, come to a conference. We have them 3 times a year. They're around the country. Come. It costs you a couple $100 to fly there. We normally let someone come free the first time they come to a conference, just because we don't want anybody who doesn't want to be a part of the organization. I mean, because what we're looking for is people to share, and everybody can learn something from someone else, and that's what makes the network great. And so we normally, I normally say, come, check it out, meet the people that are there. If it's not for you, shake hands. What have you got to lose? You go home, and it didn't solve your problem. But more than likely, if you're like every other contractor out there, you're going to find that there's a lot of people in that room that'll have solutions to the problems that you have, and you'll find a whole group of people that are willing to help, and it could change your life.
That's great, and that's a really great offer that you've got for that, because again, that's something you guys do a little bit different, because there's not a lot of organizations that would say, hey, come to our conference where we got all this education for 2.5 or 3 days, where we'll provide that for free, and a wonderful network of contractors who are willing to share what they're doing as a success in their area, and that really speaks a lot to who you are as a person, Scott, and what you're trying to build CCN as. So I really appreciate and honor the work that you guys are doing. I think it's tremendous out there. And any of the listeners right now, take Scott up on his offer, because like I said, I've been to 3 conferences in the past, and I'm not I'm not a contractor. I'm in the contracting business, of course, with SWD. But if I became a contractor tomorrow, if I start my own business, the first thing I would do is give Scott a call. Okay, I want to be a member of your organization and start coming to these things, because I need to learn everything I can about it, because I don't know all the details, and it's those little subtleties, like you said, that can take your profit margin from 3% to 13 or 20%. And all of a sudden, put a lot more money in your pocket. So thank you very much. Any other final words, final thoughts for our audience?
No, I mean, all I can say is, feel free to share my contact information. We're at contractors.net on the internet. You can check us out, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, and happy to help. So that's kind of what we do, and I hope some people will take advantage of it and better their lives and better their business.